Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BSN's A Long Story Short. Today, we are focusing on blockchain technology and its role in smart cities, and that includes the regulation, the risks, and the development from a technological standpoint. Joining me on this topic are three distinguished guests: Mathias from R3, Vincent Wang, who is the executive president of Wanxiang Blockchain, and David Lee, who is a professor at Singapore University of Social Sciences. You guys are all very notable experts on the subject, so I think today's discussion should be very lively. Feel free to jump in at any point and take over my role as host when you have something important to say. So why don't we start by giving everyone a little background context, maybe on yourselves and the role that you fill, so that people can kind of understand how you play a part in this industry. Why don't we start with Mathias?
Sure, thanks, Ben. So hi, everybody. I'm Mathias. I'm from R3 enterprise blockchain firm based out of Singapore. I look after strategy and operations in all of APAC, and I focus a lot of my use cases in trade and supply chain, as well as data privacy and confidential computing.
All right, thank you. Vincent, would you like to take over?
Sure. I lead Wanxiang Blockchain company. As people in the global blockchain industry probably aware of, Wanxiang has been investing in blockchain and deploying a blockchain ecosystem in China and beyond. So we have invested about 150 companies so far, building a vibrant ecosystem with adjacent technologies and industrial applications. So we're looking out for opportunities to bring the value of blockchain to the global community and various industries.
Okay, excellent. And finally, David?
Yes, I'm a professor in Singapore University of Social Sciences and also Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. And I do research, teach, and also build ecosystem. I founded the Blockchain Association of Singapore, Global FinTech Institute, and I also do some investment into cryptocurrencies and blockchain company.
Oh, okay. Very, very interesting. Maybe we'll have to dive into that a little bit later. I think we should give some people some overall context. So, like right now, some basics. We talk about smart cities. What are we seeing out there, right? Like what is the definition kind of a smart city from your perspective? Why don't we start with David, since Singapore is pretty widely renowned as like one of the most modern smart cities on the planet at this stage.
Yes, I think there are a lot of projects in Singapore at this moment, and we are slowly seeing the convergence of hardware and software, because there's physical infrastructure and there's a digital infrastructure. On the physical infrastructure side, I'm sure Wanxiang can fill us in with a lot of plans that they have in Singapore. And Singapore government has also trying to make a smart city a green city. So we are spending a lot on, building a green city and a green town within a green city as well. So there's a hard infrastructure side. But a lot of activity seems to be focusing on the software at this moment, especially on digital infrastructure, from building identity on the blockchain to certification, documentation on blockchain. And then we are moving on to also, in some ways, in the university, we're doing blockchain communication. And you can see that eventually there will be a convergence, but it's still at a very early stage. But we are seeing a lot of activities. We are seeing a lot of companies and startups coming to Singapore with all sorts of expertise. And a lot of projects are at the national level, because Singapore is a port, and also we have a lot of international trade. So we start off with a lot of software and digital infrastructure for trade as well, cyber securities. So you can see that it's progressing on all fronts, but eventually they will converge towards using distributed ledger. That's my own view.
Also, in Singapore, they're building this housing development right in the west part of town, where it's going to be a bunch of interconnected buildings that have, they share a central, ventilation system where the electricity is kind of only on demand, right? So it's not all the time on. But they share other types of services, beyond the water and electricity, like roads, pavements. People are able to kind of maybe trade energy or submit to the energy grid. And so these are, so kind of things that we're seeing as well in part of Singapore as part of like the physical infrastructure you're talking about. In terms of kind of software and infrastructure, as you were mentioning, there's a lot of interconnectivity, especially in the supply chain, right? With initiatives like the Singapore Trade Exchange, in which many stakeholders in the ecosystem are, trying to connect, whether it's blockchain or other technologies, so that there could be a common data infrastructure, and people are able to have visibility on supply chains on the port, or when the goods are coming in or coming out, customs clearance, etc. That's still good.
Sorry, I dropped out. I had a little bit of an internet issue there. Ironic, speaking about smart cities, maybe I need to improve my infrastructure here. I don't know what I missed, but maybe Vincent, if you want to continue kind of on that and like what we're seeing, particularly in areas like Shanghai and China, on the smart city front.
Right. Yeah. A smart city is about smart capabilities that evolve with the technological development, rather than just a conglomerate of smart features. And so too often we have seen top-down design of a smart city that based by technology companies that really has not been able from its birth to keep up with the development of digital economy and reality on the ground. So smart capability. But what do we mean by smart capability? Smart capabilities are not only the targets of technical innovation. It's based on understanding of how the society works on the ground and how people interconnect and how people interact with the cities. So I love when I've been following Smart City since my Intel days, and I love to talk to contrarian people about Smart City, skeptics of a Smart City. I remember there's one comment made by someone who's definitely belonging in the camp of skeptics. He said that technology companies, when it comes to Smart City, are like birds of prey, hovering over the city, looking for prey to catch and turn them into a technical project. So this is basically a bird's eye view of the city. Will only lead to smart features like a smart traffic light or some smart infrastructure projects, but they would be doomed to be fragmented. So we need to take a bottom-up view of a smart city infrastructure architecture. We need to understand how the data is collected, how the data is exchanged, and who owns the data, data sovereignty on the user level, on the commercial level, and on the administrative level. So this is something we spend a lot of time looking into, and this happens to be an area where blockchain and adjacent technology can add a lot of value.
Yeah, how do you? I just want to follow up on that. How do you respond to that sort of criticism? And do you think what are the big drivers really? Because I know David, he mentioned the environmental impact, right, as being a big driver. So yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think Singapore is going big into green energy, just like China. That's one growth area, especially when you try to make energy more efficient, less emission, carbon zero, and so on. But at the same time, I think Vincent had mentioned correctly that Singapore government is also focusing a lot on cybersecurity and privacy protection. There is a group in GovTech in Singapore. They focus on privacy protection and we have universities and as well as in the Ministry of Defense looking into cybersecurity as well. You can't talk about smart city where it's green, and yet you have all these gadgets and IoTs collecting information, and then you have criminals or other malicious element invading your database, and then you lose all your digital assets. So I think Singapore government focuses a lot on cybersecurity way back in about 4 or 5 years. And then they also realized that blockchain is important in many ways, is immutable. They have also the ability to return the digital data to the people, so that with the private key, you can manage your own identity or manage your own certificates and documents in many ways. Of course, there is a combination of centralized ledger with distributed ledger, but they are part of the process in the storage where it's important to use certain techniques, especially they focus on zero knowledge proof for some of the activities that they are embarking on. So I think Singapore also at this moment are looking into building trust, especially in trust in ledger. So you should see a lot more activities, a lot more recruitment that we will see in the area of trustless technology, which basically means distributed ledger and blockchain. So all in all, I think a lot of people just think about hardware, but actually the hardware itself, you can always build smart cities, but Singapore is looking further into that, into cybersecurity and privacy protection, and that naturally leads to distributed ledger technology.
Thanks, David. Vincent, did you want to add on to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think David basically shared insights that I'm prepared to elaborate. So this is what I'm going to do. They actually, I talk about the top-down design versus the on-the-ground, bottom-up design. So what exactly are the challenges for smart city from a bottom-up perspective? Are we happy with a smart city or a modern city? And if we're not, why? Why not, right? So I think on the one hand, the navigating around the modern city and accessing as many amenities continue to require conscious effort. So they're not as intuitive. On the other hand, in online community, when we do e-commerce, when we do social networking, we're getting used to this kind of an intuitive, intuitive understanding of our needs and catering to our needs. And when you get out of door, and the city seems to be somewhat disappointing, not being able to meet that expectation, right? So how do we do that? So the city is, let me put it this way: the city is dumber than we would like. On the other hand, the city is too smart for our likings, because the city knows too much about us. And the data, there are a lot of private data being collected by the city that we feel kind of unsafe or uncomfortable about. So now, what if we can use DID and data bank technology, that the technology innovation based on blockchain that David alluded to? We use those to first give the data sovereignty back to the people. Secondly, when, with these data solidly in their own hands, they decide when to exchange and to what extent they will make it accessible, rather than just exposing all the raw data with this full glory of our interesting private lives. How do we generate value? So to make the city know us better, know our needs better, without knowing who we are, without knowing things that we do not want to know. So this is where blockchain plus privacy computing it will add tremendous amount of value.
Okay. Mathias, I feel like we should jump back to you, because obviously you're more on the tech implementation infrastructure side of things, right? So I'm curious how you would respond to these different topics that David and Vincent have been talking about.
Actually, I think they're both quite on point about that. There's a fine balance between kind of data privacy, but also transparency and visibility, right? And the blockchain and other means of privacy preserving techniques, whether it's zero knowledge proofs or confidential computing, they can achieve said balance, right? So if the city is able to know us better and or have us without revealing the underlying data about, for example, maybe our identities or certain details that we want to be kept private, and we would like citizens to remain in control of their data, and in terms of cybersecurity, also extremely important. You don't want a single point of failure, right? And that's where a distributed ledger would come in, where you're only keeping your own data in your own vault or in your own servers, but there's no single point of failure. And so it's kind of important to keep that balance as well. And transparency is also needed, because if ever anything needs to be audited, or if, for example, certain projects or need that kind of transparency either from the public or from the regulators to make sure that there's no bad actors acting, then these technologies like this blockchain, whether it's peer-to-peer or public blockchain, these are extremely important in the kind of underlying infrastructure that will make any smart city be smart, right? So first you need to lay out the proper groundwork before you can maybe do all the fancy things, like maybe any IoT devices recording tons and tons of information per second, right? So how are we going to protect that data, and how are we going to reveal that data to make the most use of it? Those are the two important questions, and tech can solve for all of that. And R3, as well as many other companies, are working in exactly those two directions. So I think that was spot on.
Yeah, could you expand a little bit more? Like, are there any examples of smart cities that R3 is currently working on, just for some context?
So there are certain aspects of smart cities. So, for example, there's wholesale energy trading. So in a smart city where people may have their own solar power plants, they have kind of solar cells, and maybe for themselves, but maybe if they have extra electricity, they'd like to give it back to the grid and then sell it at the market price at that particular point of time. So, peer-to-peer trading, which is allowed on Corda, R3's blockchain, allows you to have that kind of real-time visibility of the supply and demand of energy at that particular point in time, so that citizens who contribute to the grid are able to get instant royalties, and they have visibilities on when there's a demand surge or there's supply surge. So that's energy wholesale trading is a good example of smart cities. Other ones are maybe cities such as maybe Singapore, which have an important port and a very important supply chain within the city. And with many ships coming in and out, whether it's container ship or bulk cargo ships, there sometimes needs to be many different kind of entities connecting with each other, almost like a giant warehouse management system at the port, in which people have visibility on the capacity of the port at a particular point in time, where they're able to trade bunker delivery notes, where they're able to kind of clear customs using, title documents, electronic title documents like bills of lading, when they're able to maybe obtain financing for shipping and have your goods ready to go in a matter of hours instead of days. So these are kind of ways where we're working smart city in the supply chain and port and trading kind of aspect as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Vincent, Vincent, just kind of follow up on that. I mean, Wanxiang is also quite well known for their blockchain side. So, right. So when you're, working with like smart cities and governments in a city and provincial, regional level, how do you kind of integrate with the other different technologies and bring it all together to create something like what David and Mathias were just talking about?
Sure. To us, when we when we develop industrial applications in city for a digital city, we focus on two keywords. One is data, the other one is carbon. So I'll discuss a number of projects that we've been working on and how they connect to digital city and how they connect to adjacent technologies like IoT, 5G. Data first. So we are in Shanghai and in Lower Yangtze River region, other cities in the Lower Yangtze River region. We've been working on this what we call a trusted data pedestal. So basically, this is a data infrastructure, underlying data infrastructure that manages not the full digital ID, but that's not in the private domain, but a distributed ID targeting commerce in digital economy in the city environment. And so this will combine the data of user preferences. These are not the super sensitive data. These are user preference data that various platforms like Didi or Dianping or or in US Yelp have been collecting anyway. So if we can organize these user data and combine that to business data and administrative data, then we can build this data pedestal. Then on this data pedestal, the owner of these data will go their separate. Will stay their separate with their separate identities. So what this will be able to do is that it allows city user features in urban environment that are otherwise not achieved with the Web 2.0 portals. Now you have to swipe different apps out, and you have to address in order to address your different needs. What if one day we can have a sort of a TikTok-like app, where instead of you going in and search different offers based on where you are in the city can be pushed to you. All you need to do is say yes or no. So you can swipe it away, or you can get more. So this way, the city becomes more interactive, self-adaptive, user-friendly, and intuitive to navigate around. And along the first step toward this vision, last year we began to work on a project for Chinese travelers to Japan. That was defined. That project was defined earlier in 2020 when China was in a lockdown. Japan was prepared to have the Summer Olympic in 2020 as planned, where at that time, Japan hasn't got a major pandemic yet. So we use a DID plus data bank to make sure that the preferences of the Chinese visitors to the Olympics held in Japan will be understood based on historical data, and their records, their whereabouts before they depart from China would also be able to be checked with a previously agreed criteria. But of course, when pandemic spread around the world, that project is on hold. But we believe that in the future, to build a more robust city, that this product definition will continue to work. So this is on the data side. On the carbon side, we have been working with a number of leading EV OEMs and battery vendors to make the separation, the commercial separation of battery as an asset and your EV a reality. So what that does is that it addresses a number of the business model problem when you continue to sell EV as a whole, rather than separating, partitioning the battery asset and the vehicle side. This will also allow the responsible recycling of EV battery into different application domains, especially energy storage that will be going into the urban infrastructure as well. So there we use IoT technology. We also use knowledge graph to understand how the asset portfolio looks like how to calculate remainder value. So that's a great example of blockchain and adjacent technologies. Sorry for, there's too many things that we can do and we have been doing. And so this is a long discussion.
I think it's very helpful to hear the context. And I'm curious, David, you're more of from an academic perspective, how you see like these use cases that they just spoke of. If you have any feedback on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You go back to the purpose of having a smart city is to use the infocom and communication technology to develop and bridge all the system to make it more efficient, to improve the life of the citizens and also to improve your competitiveness in terms of business and economics. And this will include the transport systems, water supply, network, power, school, hospitals, and almost everything else, the ports, just like Mathias mentioned, register for ships that come into the port, supply chain financing, and even include the central bank digital currency. So all in all, it's all about, to me, and Singapore too, I can see why sometimes Singapore is seen as an innovation island, purely because the regulation is very pro-business. But so when you look at the whole idea of a smart city, really is actually trying to achieve a balance. And Singapore tend to do that to be more inclusive. Doesn't matter whether it's centralized ledger, distributed ledger, private blockchain, public blockchain. It's all about the design thinking. And I think the older thinking in this discussion, Vincent and Mathias will talk about the data privacy and security. A lot of time we think about zero trust, meaning that you have a trusted government, you can do no wrong, and therefore you'll protect the data 100%. But we found out in reality that's not the case. First, anyone can actually go into as long as the internet, it's just a matter of what cost of hacking that people will hack into your system. So you got to increase the cost of hacking, definitely, and distributed ledger technology is one way to do that. So zero trust has got one issue because it's a centralized authority. And the other issue is that it has to do with regulation, legislation, and so on. Sometimes one ministry may, out of good faith, they create digital infrastructure, but because of regulation, it may be accessible to another ministry without the knowledge of this ministry. So regulation plays an important part. So zero trust is subject to hacking and also legacy regulation that you may have. Whereas the case of trustless technology, it is different. It is you can have a centralized, trusted government, centralized authority, and people trust the government, but you have another layer of protection because it's trustless. And you don't have to trust anyone, and even the government themselves may not want to trust themselves and take on the responsibility of storing all this data and take on the liability for that. So in Singapore, it seems to be a combination of zero trust and trustless technology. And that is important because then you strike a balance. It's all about design thinking, and also that blockchain cannot solve all problems. So you need a combination of public blockchain. It's very much a philosophy of BSN, right? You have a public blockchain where it perhaps is the cheapest way, the low-cost way of having transparency as well as immutable record, and a way to build trust, giving the confidence. But you may want to have a private blockchain because of efficiency, because of other reasons, but you may also want to have a centralized ledger. So I think in Singapore, we tend to be more inclusive and looking at interoperability, and also look at the functions and incorporate all those into the design thinking to ensure the technology actually is serving mankind and its citizens rather than just be technology centric.
Okay. we're about halfway through, and I think I've asked enough easy questions, so maybe I'll start making them a little bit more difficult. I'm kind of curious now, what is the incentive for governments, right, to design these systems? Because David, you're talking about the importance of design for trust, right? So what is the incentive for private companies and governments to do this sort of thing as people, are being pushed into these smart cities kind of without realizing it? What is the safeguards here in place?
Yeah. So I think if you look at the fourth industrial revolution, it's important to note that, to me, it's not AI or big data alone, right? It is more than that. It's peer-to-peer communication. You can have mesh network communication. You have peer-to-peer carbon trading and energy efficiency. So peer-to-peer communication is important. That leads to peer-to-peer exchange of value, and that too is the driver and actually is the accelerator for the fourth industrial revolution. And in the beginning, only the cypherpunks realized that when you have the virtual world, you have to have privacy protection. It's going to be doing peer-to-peer communication and exchange of value. Nobody really pays very much attention until some of the corporates take it on. And I think the turning point comes when Facebook sort of created the idea of Libra, and then become Diam. And suddenly great government realized that if we do not respond with the right technology, then a lot of sovereignty will be in some ways eroded. So that is from the central bank digital currency perspective that we are talking about. But at the same time, as government venture into the virtual world, they realize that it is unlike the physical world, right? You have your policeman, you have your military is physically encroached, and then you find that you are very much in charge. But in the virtual world, it's like the open sea, it's free for all. And government realize that if they don't respond, they will be very vulnerable. So that's the second reason. And thirdly, I think from the international competitiveness, for example, in Singapore, we are in trade, and it's a very not well organized arena where party interests are all spread throughout. Everybody has their own interests, and blockchain is one way to bring them together. If you can design something that encompass everybody's interest, you actually can entice the private sector to come and join you. So in SUSS, we have a project with BSN is part of it, that we get many more private sector to come, but it's funded by the government in the sense that we build this is no more the hard infrastructure. The government has to build the digital infrastructure, because that is the beginning of open blockchain concept that the SME can come on board with the least cost. And from the government perspective, it makes a lot of sense, because the marginal cost of expansion of a distributed ledger network is almost zero to the government. So you just build a road and they buy their own car to come on board and use it. So it makes a lot of sense to have the public-private sector partnership to build new infrastructure to take advantage of the peer-to-peer exchange of value and peer-to-peer messaging and communication in order for any government to retain its sovereignty, whether it's monetary policy, whether it's fiscal policy, for taxation, as well as for its own economic policy.
Okay. Mathias, do you want to jump in there from like an R3 perspective on how you approach this issue?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, from touching a lot on what David said, this peer-to-peer transfer of value that's been R3 Corda's kind of mantra since day one, and that's how we differ notably from public blockchains and maybe other blockchains as well. Is that ours is strictly a peer-to-peer need to know, and that's increasingly important when it comes to wholesale trading, or buying or trading digital assets, or distributing central bank digital currencies. these foundations and groundworks do have to be put in place by the government, or else you would have a lot of private companies kind of creating isolated silos of data. And what we want really is maybe a regulator or a government to push for greater interoperability or access to all of them. And so that's why R3 works very closely with government relations in order to tap in and provide our technology as part of one of the legs of all the different infrastructure projects that are happening. And yeah, on top of that, I think in terms of data privacy and regulation, there's a big push from the consumers that are pushing for changes in regulation. These are happening. It happened in Europe. It's happening a lot in North America now, and it's going to happen soon in every other country. And these changes in regulation push for more stringent data privacy techniques to make sure that third-party vendors don't have access to underlying data revealing identities or other sensitive information, but while still being able to harness the power of analytics to get insights for either for commercial purposes or for fraud detection purposes, right? And so these are the kind of projects that R3 as a private company works with the government, right? Fraud detection, reg tech, common data infrastructures, and I think that's kind of the key to the future is having one authority that's able to move the needle and gets a lot of private companies to collaborate and work together and push for these kind of working groups. I don't want to use the word consortia, but a group of companies that usually don't collaborate to actually come together and collaborate and share data and provide insights, all while not revealing their trade secrets, their identities, their customer, their costs, their prices. And so that's really, I think, the key to the future.
Yeah. I think, a lot of these topics you guys are bringing up, it always reminds me of, Shanghai and the situation with the CBDC here and the design of the CBDC here. So I'm really curious to get Vincent some more feedback from you, particularly around this issue, and how you see the smart city governance being developed in cities around China.
Sure. I think to address your earlier question about why is what's government's interest and the private businesses' interest in smart city, we need to understand that smart city is not just a technological vision. It's also probably even more importantly, it's a social vision and it's an economic vision, and it's increasingly becoming a environmental vision as well. So this is on the higher up, on the ground level. A city's resident is also wearing so many different hats. So they are a citizen. They could be a citizen. They could be a parent. They could be a hipster. They could be a public interest organizer, or they could be an innovator. I think Singapore understands that very well, and that's why we have embarked on this collaboration with Singapore in PDD, the Punggol Digital District, to experiment and to land many of the design thinking, as David so emphatically reminds us. That's very, very important. Design thinking that aligns all these different visions, social, economic, technological vision, and merge these different identities of every individual. Now, I think the Shanghai and Singapore, over the years, over the previous decades, there have been a lot of very close collaboration in China's urban development between Singapore and China. Singapore has major projects in Suzhou, in Tianjin, in Guangzhou, and now in Shenzhen as well. And I think this will be a great cadence of a TikTok cadence of doing experimenting with more visionary possibilities, and then land, bring it to scale, and then bring it to even larger scale on the other side of the TikTok cadence. So that's why we're very interested in urban development, in smart city development in Singapore, and urban development at large in Shanghai. I think coming back to Shanghai, I think there's if you read the comments in YouTube channel or sometimes in social network channels, you would I think there's a prevailing illusion about data privacy being only of concern to Europeans and Americans. I think that illusion is created because Europeans and Americans talk a lot about data privacy. But in China, both the government and large enterprises, they take action, sometimes proactively, sometimes less than proactively, as we can have seen in the case of certain major technological giants in China. And so no one is excluded from the enforcement of data privacy protections. Now, on the other hand, if the best way to protect your private data is completely withholding it, it has two problems. One is that it's not doable if you move around. Secondly, it really hampers innovation and urban development. So what blockchain can do, at least technically, blockchain has the potential to do, if we apply the right design thinking with the right ecosystem partners, including the administrative, the commercial sides, and the private, the private citizens. Now that at least blockchain has as a productive relation engine. This analogy is often made to the two pillars of capitalism. One is a productive force, one is productive relation. AI is about productive force, make things more efficient. Blockchain is more about organizing the relationships in the data network and business network. Now, if we realize the full potential of blockchain in doing that, then when it comes to private data, there's a way to eat your cake and have it. So you can circulate, you can allow access without exposing the raw data. So I think this is what we are trying to do in the secured, trusted data pedestal for urban city. And this approach, we believe, reaches the right compromise between all parties of interest, from the municipal government to business operating in urban economy to individuals living in the city.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think that, David, you probably have some things that you want to follow up on here from a social science perspective.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting conversation here. And I think Vincent, Wanxiang has a lot of other technology, like secure multi-party computing. We have a lot of other technology that we can talk about, but we're not going to delve in that. But my point here is that, in Singapore, any licensed financial institution will have a technology risk management committee. And I think that is important if you want private sector to come along, because not every company is as conversant with blockchain literacy as Wanxiang or R3 or any of us who are involved in this area, because even for us, it takes a lot to catch up every day. So when you have a board of directors where you have a special committee devoted to technology risk management, you will start to pay a lot more attention on data privacy protection, a lot more attention to ethics and moral, which we can see, because sometimes a corporate can end up with a situation where winner takes most or winner takes all situation in terms of data, and use those data to extract rent. So that's one reason. The other more important reason is that if you don't have a technology risk committee, who really understand the technology, it's very difficult for a company to make decision because you have fiduciary duties. And if you do not understand some of this deep tech, then you really can't advise the company or make a decision to go ahead and say, yeah, I'm going to have TTE, or you're going to have SM, secure multi-party computing, or zero knowledge proof, because it's not easy to understand to make an informed decision. So it is important that to think not only of regulation, not only of software, not only hardware, but the community need to think about education as well. How do we have more people who understand and feel comfortable? What is the risk and complexity of using this technology? So if there's anything that goes wrong, I have something to fall back to. This is the benchmark. I have a third-party audit company or advisor from Wanxiang or from R3 that has vetted through this project, has given me go ahead. Then my fiduciary duties as a board of directors will be reduced in that sense, and therefore to make an informed decision. Otherwise, the risk is not doing anything, and no matter what the government has done, the private corporation are not going to move forward and have to second guess what the government is doing and try to see whether it will backfire. So the third thing is that the consistency of the regulation and also approachable regulators are very important. There must be constant communication between the regulators with the corporates, such as using the sandbox or having a coffee place within your regulators building, that anytime any startups, any corporates who want to venture into something new are able to get some guidance, and very transparent guidance, so that it doesn't come back and haunt you sometime in the future. I think those are some soft infrastructure that is important for this smart city to take off. It is not, like Vincent and Mathias were saying, it's not just about the software, the hardware, but also there is a different kind of environment that you need to sort of having this innovation to take place.
Mathias, let's jump back to you, because all those things David brought up in terms of like dealing with regulators and working with governments. I mean, is that something that R3 is very actively doing?
Yeah, definitely. So in pretty much every geography we operate, we work closely with the government relations and regulators, not just financial regulators, but also maybe and trade, or maybe just industry bodies, because really blockchain is collaborative nature. You got to bring different parties together to collaborate, and somebody needs to move the needle, and it's often these regulators and industry bodies. And so maybe one example is kind of fighting financial crime or anti-money laundering. You need different banks to participate and provide certain data points and share them with each other, and to be able to have some sort of AI model that flags suspicious behavior more efficiently. But how do you convince all the banks to share that confidential data? Maybe they can or they cannot do that. So through a combination, of course, of regulatory bodies that push for these, or maybe just provide kind of RFPs or grants or projects to kind of incite private companies or corporations or banks to come together and collaborate, as well as kind of technological aspect to it, which it could be confidential computing, secure multi-party computation, zero knowledge proofs, that gives regulators the knowledge that people will not be able to misuse data, that actual customer data will be protected, identities will be protected, but that the information needed in order to be able to flag suspicious anti-money behavior is actually flagged. And currently, a lot of these money laundering solutions or financial fraud solutions are lacking that useful information, right? That is at that granular level. And in order to train these models better, you need to incite different banks to come together and collaborate and give in. So that's one of examples where really the regulators and government, need to kind of, push and get people to come and work together. Because, I mean, AML and, terrorist financing is obviously not just kind of on the shoulders of government, but also of banks, of corporates, of, customs and, technology companies now as well.
And do you find, like, from a strategy perspective that you target certain regions more heavily, based on regulations, like in the sense that unfriendly regulations would deter you from operating in those industries or in those regions?
I kind of see it the other way around. I think we just go towards friendly regulators first, or regulators which are more tech savvy or willing to do projects first. I mean, other governments, it's not that they don't have, the intention to do so, but maybe they rather, see somebody else try it first and then they'll adopt the winning model rather than trying to fail, and maybe they don't have that room for error. But yeah, we definitely kind of target, areas where there's a lot of, trade involved. Singapore, right? Hong Kong, New York, London, and, Shanghai as well. Like, these are places where financial institutions, for example, can really come together, share data in practical ways, and which would, allow to flag suspicious behavior for money laundering or terrorist financing as well.
And Vincent, I think you've had the benefit in China of government that pushed really early on with the 5-year plan for blockchain, and now they're pushing really hard on carbon, and big data has always obviously been a thing. So, like, how important has that been in China? And then, I mean, do you see that giving any advantage to all the economic development that's happening here?
Yeah, I think you mentioned regulators. You mentioned friendly versus unfriendly regulator. I'm not sure I feel completely comfortable when I hear the term friendly regulator. That reminds me of FAA in US when it comes to Boeing and led to aviation disasters. I think the regulators should not be friendly or unfriendly with private enterprises or technology company. Instead, they should be, I think the merit of a good regulator is understanding, tech savvy, methodical, and a regulator with a plan. That's a kind of regulator that will be good for the society and for protection of citizens' interest, as well as for the technology companies. So in this regard, I think Singapore regulators are really great. They are understanding, they're methodical. They actually proactively help technology companies in bringing technology to fruition and to create value. I think in China, China is very different from Singapore. In China, everything, when a new technology is being evaluated or a new business model enabled by the said technology is being evaluated, it's always it's as if the risk and economic return are put on the scale and see, if the economic return overweighs the risk, and then usually this is a go. However, in terms of methodically bringing that forth, I think we have seen pros and cons in that approach. And we have seen pro examples and counter examples. But, like everything else in the world, the government agencies are also evolving entities. I remember 2 years ago at Wanxiang, the International Blockchain Week in Shanghai, the former chairman of the Bank of China, Mr. Li Hui, said that the technology company should not view regulators as the opponent in the zero-sum game, and on the other hand, the regulators should not see technology innovation as a necessary disruption or threat. Instead, there should be an alignment of technical logic, business logic, economic logic, and the regulatory logic, because the regulatory logic often combines the social and economic, the evaluation of social and economic impacts of technology that technology companies are not always prescient about. So we in the blockchain domain, we have seen that evolving, and we hope that it will continue to evolve in a way that allow blockchain industry to create more value, more economic value and social value. And we should work hard to combine with other technology means to reduce the exposure of data privacy to promote value. And carbon, as you said, is one of the most important value that can be fulfilled with this architecture. There need to be economic architecture based on carbon considerations. And the EV battery scenario that I mentioned before, this product design takes a step forward. And in the meantime, we have been proactively working with Shanghai's carbon exchange and the regulators behind it to make sure that the blockchain trust assurance will be woven into the future carbon infrastructure.
Very nice. David, Vincent was just very complimentary of the regulatory situation there. And then, obviously we see other things like the recent infrastructure bill in the US, right? And I mean, from your perspective, how do you see the different relationships here between regulators and the private sector, and then obviously the development of the technology?
Yeah, I think to follow up on Vincent, actually Singapore admire China very much because it's a huge country, lots of resources, a lot of good talents and so on, and China can survive on its own, even if it close down and will grow for the next 10 to 15 years. But Singapore do not have that privilege. So from back on the independence, Singapore has always been taking the open economy approach. We are interport trade, so we live where we try to ensure that all parties have their interests all encumbered in whatever we do. So it's very much in line with the blockchain philosophy that we are just a node rather than a center. So with that survivor instinct, we have an open economy. We don't even have our own water in the beginning. We don't have our own military. We don't have a lot of things. So we learn how to survive, and we can't control our own money supply. We can only look at the exchange rate. So we are very vulnerable in all fronts, and we learn how to survive in this very volatile world that we are in. So with that philosophy, that's how we end up with a regulatory environment to try to ensure that everybody's interest is taken care of as a node. And we are not a center in the sense that we are in no position to dictate the rest of the world. So it's very much in line with the distributed ledger technology philosophy that we have. And the product that you are seeing at this moment is precisely what we have for the past 50 over years. So when Mathias was talking about getting institutions together, and Singapore is very, very used to that. There's no point, there's a Chinese saying, there's no point, pressing the head for a cow or a horse to drink the water. They have to drink it themselves, right? And if they don't, then you create very good liquid diet for them, and then they will decide to drink it. So if sometimes the equation doesn't gel. If the company is doing well, they're making billions of dollars a year, and then you ask them to take on the risk of money laundering risk, KYC, which they will have to spend a lot of resources, and then the return is so little in the short period of time, they just cannot answer to the shareholders or board of directors. So then as regulator, they will then have to think of a new way to invite those people who are more forward-looking and willing to invest money together with the investors and the shareholders that will support them in those areas. So we have the digital bank license. We have the payment licenses. And that is the acknowledgement that the banks are doing well and contributing to the economy, but it's just unrealistic to ask them to do digital banking because they don't have the patents, they don't have the technology. 3 out of 4 digital bank licenses are from China. They have all the technology, they have all the patents, they have the latest that you can have in commercialization of digital banking to the region. So Singapore then said that yes, we leave the bank alone. They can do whatever they like. They are doing very well. We appreciate that for the economy, the creating jobs, but we need to grow. So we invite more to come and join the game, and that's not enough. So why don't we give the payments license to invite more crypto companies, tokenization, and we have the Omnibus Act. So I think it's more because we, for the past 50 years, we learned how to survive by taking care of the interests of the corporates, the people, making a good balance as well with different governments, that we end up with a X factor. So it's not something that many other countries can replicate. Neither can we be as privileged as America or as privileged as Europe or as privileged as China, because each have its own advantages and each has its own disadvantage. And being small, we can be more agile. We can experiment a little bit more. We make a mistake, we can change. We can lock down immediately if we want to. It's very different from China. I mean, we don't have a lot of speculation, so we are able to, be a bit more adventurous with cryptocurrency as well. So the negative has actually harnessed to be a positive for Singapore. So that's how I look at it. And to answer your question, we learn how to be innovative even in policy making.
Thank you for that. I mean, we're running towards the end of our hour here, so I don't want to keep you guys too long. I'm curious if, Mathias, you had anything you wanted to add on to that there before we start to wrap up.
No, I think actually both Vincent and David were spot on. Vincent on, whether a regulator should be friendly or efficient, and also Vincent, talking about the importance of carbon and how it's going to be a carbon economy soon. And, just 1 ton of carbon is going to be an asset, or a digital asset in this case, that's going to be in high demand. And it's going to be in different exchanges. It's going to be in different business networks used in different ways, different companies. And I think the sooner, companies, especially with maybe regulators trying to incentivize people to offset their carbon or lower their emissions in one way or another, whether it's tax as a stick or maybe grants as a carrot, then that's one way to move forward. And then David, of course, talking about Singapore. I mean, I live in Singapore, but as a foreigner, it's actually amazing. I came in and I was able to see what they're able to do in just a short span of 50 years. And and it turns out, they kind of turned the tables, right? They used what they had to their advantage, and now they're able to be extremely agile. And that's why they're able to kind of maybe take risks and get ahead. And so, I mean, it's actually a pleasure working here in Singapore with all these, regulators that are, as it was mentioned, they're proactively helping, private companies instead of seeing us as a threat. They're enticing us to collaborate with other companies and, bring the industry together. And I think I'm quite optimistic for a smart city future, at least in Singapore. I haven't been to many other cities that are this advanced as well, but also maybe just because I just arrived in Asia. But I mean, I see if we're talking about long-term vision and kind of the movie-like aspect of what's a smart city. You'd see maybe a car paying for its own parking, have its own wallet, all of that doing like a peer-to-peer trading, mass interconnectivity, but also strong data privacy, where you can very well clearly state what you're able to share or you're not share. Maybe the ad tech world or the advertising world will be one where maybe permission is asked whether you would like to participate in particular campaign, and to the fact where, it may be based on your location services, you're offered a special promotion at a store nearby, but without actually revealing, who you are or what you like to third parties. And so this the kind of, world that I hope for is a cyber secure city of collaborative nature, in which different, even competing private companies can thrive through the help of maybe, I'm not going to say friendly regulators, but maybe good regulators. So a very interesting point of view, David, actually. And I hope, maybe I can also go to China one day and see all the smart cities they were building there. I have a friend in Shenzhen who says just how amazing and how technologically advanced it is, and I hope to go there one day. But it's been a fruitful discussion. So thanks, Ben, for inviting me over and representing R3.
Yeah, well, if you want to visit, next month is the Wanxiang International Blockchain Week, so that's always a good time to stop by to learn about blockchain.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Vincent?
I think the going forward for China, the challenges and opportunities are in two keywords. One is equality, the social equality and social justice. The other one is sustainability. Equality and social justice is these considerations are behind the smart city development in recent decades. I've been walking around. I love to walk around the city. I have a similar obsession with walking around the city in the late night, like Charles Dickens in 19th century London. And I've been paying attention to what I see. The funny thing is that Chinese cities always evolve, right? You probably heard the joke that in China every 5 years is a generation gap. Yes, that's true. But I have always seen changes. What I have seen over the last 20 years is that earlier on, the dramatic changes are very visible. There's no subtlety in it. Just brand new building coming out of nowhere in where only the rice paddy exists, that sort of thing. And then that slowed down in the early 2000s. And then in recent years, I began to notice that the cities began to change again, but this time in more subtle ways, in more pleasing ways, right? In more organic ways. There are incremental changes that are ongoing and that make different communities, different neighborhoods more user-friendly, more walker-friendly. The walk score in Shanghai, I think, just skyrocketed over the last 5 years. And so with Smart City, we believe that we can bring a digital dimension to this kind of a livable, adaptive city. That is our vision. And in the meantime, we will work very closely with ecosystem partner on the sustainability to make carbon neutral city a reality.
David, any final thoughts?
Yes, well, we haven't been to Singapore. The part of the filming of season 3 of Westworld was in Singapore. So you watch Westworld, you could see part of Singapore in the kind of futuristic smart city in the future. But I'm very bullish on blockchain smart city. It doesn't matter where you are from. Eventually, you'll see in your own city. It's just a matter of time. Some countries will be earlier, some countries will be later, but it's just like water, it's just like anything else. We will see it all over the world. But Singapore is just a whole big sandbox city that worth visiting. So when this COVID thing is over, do come to Singapore so that we could have a more deep discussion and perhaps show you some of the places that we have as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm based in Shanghai. I go to Singapore quite frequently pre-COVID, but I just want to really thank everyone. It was a privilege to talk to you guys today, and hopefully we'll get a chance to continue this discourse in the future. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
See you, Vincent. Nice to meet you, David. Bye, guys.
See you, Mathias.
Thanks, Matthias. Thanks, Vincent.
And good to talk to you again, David.
Thanks, Ben.